All right. So let's get started. This is the first in a series of conversations that we're going to have exploring network leadership. We'll have a short panel and discuss self-organization, communication, conditions for stepping into leadership. The title is Engagement Clears the Way, Supporting Your Network Without Bottlenecking. And I'd love to start out by just inviting our panelists to introduce themselves. Please also give some context for a network that you have worked with where you started to get engagement and you ran into the bottleneck problem that we can use as the case studies throughout. If you're not a panelist, please turn off your video and make sure your mic is muted until the discussion part. Thanks. Lauren, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Hello, everyone, and I'm delighted to be here to talk about network engagement. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My story is all about this deep curiosity about why people think and behave the way they do. I'm just really interested and obsessed with questions around human behavior, particularly sense making and meaning making. Can we find better ways to make sense of ourselves, others, and the world together? What roles do our cultures, our worldviews, technologies play in all of that? And so I've really followed that interest throughout my education and career, which has led me to the intersection of some, I'll use the word disparate, but random would work just fine, spaces. Like cognitive psych and other fields in psychology, entrepreneurship and healthcare, learning program creation, a lot of facilitation, human-centered design, and of course, systems thinking and network design. So I'm really here because during the supply chain disruptions in the early pandemic, my colleagues and I noticed a need growing. The healthcare professionals in Colorado, and I'm sure as you all know around the world, didn't have the personal protective equipment that they needed. So as a group, we decided we were in a position to be able to make it and distribute it. So in just a few months, Make for COVID grew to a diverse coalition of 2,000 volunteers across the state of Colorado, and we really stayed focused regionally. This is an amazing community of makers and designers and artists, doctors, engineers, high school students from across the state. And we even had a few folks from around the country. So together, we really spent our time designing, manufacturing, and distributing this really essential equipment for Colorado healthcare workers and first responders. It was a totally wild ride, and I am super excited to be able to share more about that with you today. So thanks again. Christina, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Carol, and then Jay.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, happy to see some familiar faces here. And I'm Carol Xu, and I'm based in San Francisco Bay Area. I have been, it's interesting to hear Lauren talking about the overlap, the different fields. And similarly, I also kind of dived into different fields. I guess I used to be a academic researcher in the field of organizational development, organizational behavior, and I was also very much in a interdisciplinary place where I was in the School of Engineering at Stanford University. There's a department called Management Science and Engineering. And inside it, there are many, many different fields, from operations management to organizational theory and entrepreneurship. And I'm more on the social side. It's really the overlap between work technology and organization. And oftentimes people tend to get lost in the own bubble, whether it's technology, technologists, work, come up with amazing technology, but then there's nobody using it, or there's unintended consequences for technology when it's actually adopted by organizations. And then how does organizations and culture impact people's experience of work? And oftentimes we're maximizing for the efficiency and the performance at the expense of people's dignity. That we also see, in the recent layoffs in many tech companies. So what I found most intriguing and problematic is the overlap between work, technology, and organization. And now I'm a co-founder of a consulting business called The Present of Work, where we really kind of try to help support both conventional networks and also more more on the edge, kind of more human-centered networks within organizations and among organizations. I have a couple of different cases. One case is that we recently helped a New Zealand agency, government agency, that tries to energize the innovation, the entrepreneurship innovation community in New Zealand, and where we have to really engage different stakeholders. There's the technology owners, there's the adoption, the commercialization parts, and so there's many different parts. And then also we are experimenting with more of the non-conventional types of network that we're now calling it a mutual aid village. That is really about deepening the relational resilience in the mycelial network that we're embedded in. It's not about making profits. It's not about producing a service, but it's really about deepening the human connections in new and old ways. So I'll stop here.
Ooh, I love it. Hey, everybody, Jay Carmona here. I call myself just a really nerdy community organizer. But I grew up in Northern California. You're going to remember this, on an off-grid homestead. That's right. During this really wild time, which was the nexus of the war on drugs and the timber wars in Northern California. So I really grew up in like immediate exposure to really decentralized mutual aid and protest networks, and sort of like came out of my upbringing with PTSD, and also an understanding that like some systems were really messed up, and there was a long chain of people who were impacted by decisions not being part of the decisions, and we were on the end of it. And so my main sort of walk is to try to shorten that distance. And so basically, from there have tried to learn and teach and observe and do all of the things that I think help that happen. My background is I started in the field, worked up to running campaigns, managing campaigns, primarily advocacy, but some electoral work as well, to, being a lead at organizations and a center connected node at all kinds of decentralized movements, both sort of like new school and the old school, sort of like hardened node organizations, and more traditional political organizations as well. Worked in DC. I worked for 2 state governments, so very hierarchical to non-hierarchical organizations as well. And now I sort of work specifically in like a nexus of digital tools and old school organizing tools, and how can we pull those together in a really seamless way, in a way that better reflects how humans experience technology, and also social relationships and organizing, essentially. I'm at SEIU now doing some of that work, I also have been consulting specifically with groups and helping groups that are having specific issues around things like bottlenecking and some other systematic things that we see popping up, and also brand new networks, helping folks design and start these networks really intentionally, and being ready for, you know, what they're capable of long term. That's what I'm really interested in, is building for actual scale of our success, and starting that now and solving issues of scale now. So a couple of really good examples from early in my career, where I really noticed bottlenecking as a systematized process, I think, was I was working in California, and Proposition 8 passed in California. So for those of you that recall or were there, I'm sensing a little bit of a West Coast, some West Coasters here, right? So there was this whole wave of protests that happened first in California, in San Francisco, but then also, and these were primarily like direct action protests, but that quickly spread to a lot of other places in the country. And after that, I saw a lot of those protests turn into actual ground organizing operations. And then within a few years after that, a lot of them sort of fizzled out, and they were all members of a network called Join the Impact, if you remember Join the Impact. So that's a really good example. And then another one is at a very similar time in my life, I was working at 350.org. I was running the fossil fuel divestment campaign, doing that. And that was a huge network of student groups, environmental groups, religious organizations, everybody who was holding pots of money in fossil fuels, and watching that network develop and grow, and then run into just a wall of bottlenecking as well. So those are my two initial examples.
Thank you so much. What amazing. I've known all of you for a while, and I'm still learning tons of stuff about every time you introduce yourselves. I would love to explore leaning into that emotional resilience, relational resilience comment from Carol. What are ways that you are inspired by people when you start to see a network engage, that they start to support and help each other? What are the signals where you can recognize and respond to network engagement happening? And maybe just those sort of really inspiring moments first, before we delve into the many, many challenges.
Well, I can jump in here. So Make for COVID was an unintentional network, Jay, to use the opposite phrasing. We were in the right place at the right moment, and the community was ready to take action together. And because of that, the network grew so quickly. And it was literally, it would have been absolutely impossible for a small group of us to lead and onboard everyone. So within 3 weeks, we had 2,000 people, and we were prepared for maybe 50. So we worked out loud as much as possible, so that members had enough information to essentially onboard and help each other organize. And things, of course, moved really rapidly, but people were able to get the right information at the right time from one another, or find the right person to talk to in real time. And I just can't overstate how important that was to the development of the culture going forward, but also how incredibly inspiring that was for everyone. And leadership structure really emerged to support the needs of the community from that point. So people who were really excited about helping people get where they needed to go, or get the resources that they needed, started to lead just kind of naturally. So the culture really formed around peers helping peers, and it was like amazing, just totally amazing to watch. I'm still inspired every day by the beginnings of this thing.
Yeah, I can. Do we go around, or Christina? I trust your sense of like time, and just cut me off anytime. If you say we only have time for one person, then I can stop. What do you think?
No, we have some spaciousness in this. So
I
go
see.
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So to just build on what Lauren said, I think to me, what's really exciting about exploring new ways of network weaving, if you will, to me, there's a big difference. By new, it doesn't mean that, you know, we just invented it out of thin air. A lot of it is actually, it's learning from the ancient wisdom. So they're not new in that sense, but new in the sense that's different from the current dominant paradigm, which is, you know, when people say, oh, did you do networking? You know, did you, you know, like you go to a conference, you exchange, you know, business cards. And I found most of the time I have I have dozens of business cards. I never follow up. And then oftentimes I ask myself why. One kind of difference between the traditional ways of networking and the ways that Lauren was just mentioning, I think one thing is power. You know, how do we actually relate and see power? You know, in a conventional kind of type of business conferences, you know, it's basically, you know, I look at, you know, people's name tags and, you know, their job titles and is this person, you know, useful to me? And so it's very much a transactional kind of framework that centers on power dynamics, even though people don't want to talk about it. And then I think these newer ways, alternative ways of networking, like what Lauren was saying, is that we really start by actually trusting that everybody can lead. And we're trusting that everybody actually has the ability to see what's needed at different times of, you know, different points in time. And oftentimes you will be surprised. There's not such a kind of an imposed power structure at the very beginning. And that's freeing, that's empowering. So that's just, you know, one of the many different inspiring features of alternative ways of network weaving. I'll stop here.
I just want to add one, sorry, Jay, I'll just one comment based on your thoughts there, Carol, which are really, those are great insights. And I think that development of horizontal relationship is, yes, empowering, but it has like such a different quality. And the experience I think people were having, just to relate this back to our network, early in the pandemic was they felt totally powerless, totally helpless. They were doom scrolling and trying to figure out what they could do to contribute. And so if I think a vertical relationship or a transactional relationship would have, it wouldn't have given them a sense that they could really step in and help their neighbors and help their community. So yes, and I feel that very viscerally and saw that like through the many months that we all worked together. So thank you, Carol, really good point.
Ooh, I love it. And I'm going to sort of riff on that too. So one of the things that I find particularly inspiring is, and it comes as an outgrowth of a lot of these horizontal relationships that we're talking about too, but community response to individual problems, right? So there's a lot of, I think, systems that are pretty self-sustaining that are looking to individualize issues, right? For a lot of reasons in cultures that I'm part of. And something cool to see is, you know, communities that have those horizontal relationships actually, you know, centering those folks' individual needs and tackling them and meeting them as a community, and then doing that over and over and over again, right? So a great example right now in some communities that I'm part of, folks are raising money to like finish the home of an organizer's mom who has cancer right now, right? And I don't mean the kind that's like, let's all do GoFundMes and try to prop up our health insurance industry. That's not quite what I mean, right? I mean like seeing part of a community, a person in a community is having something that could easily be individualized, right? And actually putting that person at the center. And I think what's really cool about these movements is that other folks see that happening, right? And actually works to de-individualize a lot of the struggles we're experiencing. And we can actually look at, you know, patterns as well as, right, like support those members of the community that are, you know, each so incredibly, you know, valuable to us. And I think there's something really powerful about that. And then also folks watching that happen, right, within the communities. And thinking also about in the Bay Area in California, we actually just experienced the loss of the passing of a community activist, and to see her family and community like getting together, putting out press releases so that the information gets out there, raising funds to support her business and her partner, and pushing back against, you know, narratives around her passing as well is another, you know, great, you know, inspiring kind of moments that also are like coming out of, you know, really tragic at the same time pieces as well. And so looking at that and folks watching that happen, I think is pretty amazing to look at.
Amazing. The inspiration is the antidote, because horizontal and peer support of each other, I think, de-bottlenecks. So I'm wondering if you all can talk about, before we get to the many challenges, which I think we've all experienced, networks that have floods of information, get disengaged, etc. When is it appropriate to be the bottleneck? Why do people end up in this bottleneck position? What is the value of that central person that everybody knows they can go to as the network is getting started? And how do you know when to step back from that? How do you know when to really start trying to foster those horizontal connections?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in fact, I'm experiencing that myself in a couple of different contexts. So I'll just start with my own situation, and then, you know, and also in our clients. In my own situation, we have a you know, I host this, I started a thing called a communication dojo, where people come online, like it's an online kind of, mostly the practices are online. We really just intentionally practice different types of communication frameworks, you know, from nonviolent communication to T group, to BOEM dialogue, to circling, to collective presencing. All of these frameworks that helps people to more skillfully communicate their inner world, their needs, their desires, in the workplace or in life in general. So that in some ways, I and another, we call ourselves co-gardener, we started it, but soon enough we're like, you know, basically we're curating the content for everybody, for everybody else. And that that is, in some ways, it's positive, because, you know, we're providing a service, and it saves other people time. It reduces chaos. And so there's a lot of really good things about being in this position. It's a central position. We send out newsletters, you know, we share resources, but we curate the resource so that there's some quality control. So there, I see a lot of positive things that's related to somebody playing this role, but also, you know, just being a sociologist, watching a lot of, you know, social movements go up and down, and social organizations, intentional communities, you know, corporations. I also know very much aware, sometimes painfully aware, that the trap of somebody being in this central position, which is, I have my own habits. I will end up, you know, the things I curate will end up narrowing the diversity, you know, of content and opportunities. And it doesn't matter how much I work on my implicit bias, I will have them. And those biases will also, if I end up being the gatekeeper, I will also implicitly, unintentionally restrict the diversity, the innovation that could possibly happen in this community. So how do we, how do I, over time, not become a bottleneck, but still play the role, but still have some form of service to serve each other. So decoupling the problematic role, kind of the problematic elements in this bottleneck role is something that I'm continuously experimenting with. I'll stop here and
Yeah, I love it because a lot of folks talk about content creation and curation as it's a separate piece, but it's really, right, you have to give people something to form culture and identity around. Like there has to be some stuff there, right? And a lot of that, particularly, I'm interested in sort of like the way that happens, in meat space and in the internet too, like in similar but also different ways as well. I'm thinking about going back to why bottlenecking happens too. And I'm also sort of like thinking about where I first started noticing it. And one of those places, right, it's really easy to notice pretty much immediately, I think, coming in as somebody who's serving these movements, to use your word, Carol, is we notice that the people who have the best follow through are the most busy, right? Like that's a very base level. And I've noticed that in folks that have no paid staff and folks and movements that have a ton of paid staff, right? Or even hierarchical in some ways, have a very, right. So to me, that's an indicator that that's something very structural, right? And very, very human, right? I don't mean to use the word structure to be non-human. It's extremely human, right? So I think there's something about the way that groups are in particular set up and structured, right? It's definitely, to me, bottlenecking is a system, right? So that also means that it's less of an individual issue or an individual failing of humans and more about how we're setting up our orientation to the work, and also the straight up structure of how we structure our working groups and our structuring and the way that we're approaching leadership, right, at organizations. So I always talk about bottlenecking as a structure and as a system, because only a system can help fix the system, right? You can get every burnt out bottlenecked leader and we can send them to, right, retreat for 3 months. And in 3 more months, a new set of leaders will be bottlenecked, right? That is a system. And that's in particular what I am sort of interested in as well. And there are certain symptoms, right, that we can see that happening with.
To riff off of that, Jay, I think in Make for COVID in particular, we needed to slow things down intentionally. Sometimes we were moving at such a pace with so many people that the bottleneck was intentionally created to make sure that we were making decisions about effectiveness and safety, because we were doing distributed manufacturing, that it really allowed us to really come to our senses. Is this a smart choice? Is this going to serve us as a community? And so we built those really intentional decision points or bottlenecks. And then as we wanted to move faster, as the context changed, we found those bottlenecks then got in the way. So at first they were really useful, and then they were extremely difficult to eliminate, which is exactly the point you're making. They're system structures, and once you build them in and people begin to accommodate those, it's really hard to shift them, at least quickly. So yes, absolutely.
Almost like they resist you, right?
So a little bit of pushback there, yeah.
Systems are springy things, all those feedback loops. Okay, let's dive into what are the signals that not just for bottlenecking, but just when you get a really engaged network, what are the kinds of signals that you see that are warning signs, especially early ones where you don't have disengagement yet, you know, and what are the actions that you can take as somebody who's a catalyst to get that network off the ground, that address some of those things early. So we all know what it looks like when you have overwhelm and disengagement and the network just fizzles, but what about the early signals, and maybe some adjustments that you could make to shift the system early?
It's really interesting. Like, I think so many of the metrics that are typically used to measure engagement, maybe outside of the world of network weaving in this particular way, are just not sensitive enough in any way to sense the early stages of a disengaged group. And I think that what that means for network coordinators is they can't really pay that much attention to say time spent in digital spaces, or like the number of logins or impressions or survey responses or so on. And they really need to be in touch with the network, engaged in the network themselves, and sensing it in a variety of other ways. So for me, and Carol and Jay, maybe you can refine this a bit because it's rough. But for me, the indicator, I guess it's maybe two or threefold. Like, one is people losing a sense that they can contribute meaningfully. And this is subtle at first, but you can see people sort of giving away a task or stepping away from something that previously they would have stepped into. Maybe that also has to do with a sense of, or a slightly reduced sense of commitment or disconnection from the purpose of the organization. Maybe the purpose has shifted, or their purpose has shifted. And then a third thing really that goes along with those two things is like a less of a sense of belonging. And these are all kind of subtle relational things that we're, and I'm thinking about some of the things you said, Carol, in terms of communication. Like, you sense those in those contexts. And so for me, it's, you know, I'm trained as a facilitator. And so I am probably a pretty hypervigilant person, and a sensitive person. And so I'm always trying to understand and sense those things, but they are subtle. And you can feel it when something is wrong. I'll leave it at that.
I like to talk about smelling it. +1 to hypersensitive humans, hypervigilant humans. Absolutely. It's kind of, I mean, there are issues, right? But it's kind of a superpower at the same time too, right, Lauren? Okay, so I made a little bit of a list of some of the signals to me that I frequently point out to my clients that they have some sort of engagement issue. And to also, we're just jumping in using this word engagement, which, by the way, I love. It's so much more full spectrum than a lot of like digital marketers use it, right, too. So I look for, and I relate a lot of these things to like human interpersonal dynamics, because that's a frame of reference that a lot of us have, right? So like, if you're at a party, what's the signs that people are bored, right, and gonna leave? All right. So one is everyone doing the same thing, right? So we're at a party and it's a super fun party. You have people playing board games, you have people drinking over here, you have people, you know, doing charades. I remember parties, everyone, over here, right? You have the different levels of engagement, right? And we want the full spectrum from, hi, I'm just arriving, maybe a host greets you and is like, hey, some folks are over here doing this. Let me introduce you to this person, all the way over to, man, I'm going to host a party just like this tomorrow because it's amazing, right? So that's from here to here, that's a full spectrum, a full system of engagement, a full journey, if you will. I don't like the word engagement ladder, by the way. And I'm disabled. I'm not climbing a ladder for y'all right now, right? All right. So, there's a whole journey there, and I can see people at every moment in the journey. It would be weird if I walked in, everyone was literally sitting there with a drink staring at me. That's not normal. My hair would stand back up because that's not a normal human social situation. We want all of the gamut, right? Or if everybody looks the same in the community, right? Or acts the same, right? We want to see spectrum of human engagement and behavior in there. Siloing is another, one person doing something that is not, one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing. So that's a really good one. Lack of training or sharing strategies, right? So this is a type of collaboration that's group problem solving, right? Kind of like what you were talking about, where folks are watching you solve, making things obvious, making things clear, doing the business in public, right? So a lack of that happening, or it's happening behind closed doors, right? And people are scared to show it for whatever reason. Lack of movement on problems, right? So a good one is, hey, we don't have anybody to do this thing. And then it just kind of sits there, right? Is another really good one. New people leaving and not staying. So, there are some good things about that digital marketing can kind of teach us. And one is that we want to try to lower the bounce rate, right? So this is true for, I think, my experiences of new groups as well, right? So if you have a lot of new people showing up and they're like, not into this party, I'm out. Right. That is something to keep an eye on. So I often train my groups to really keep an eye on that initial, how are we pulling new folks into that journey that we've created, and how many of them are leaving before they get into it. And then the other thing is lack of social events and hanging out. Right. So this is all that stuff that I was talking about, that stuff also happens in non-business hangouts, right? So if there's actually a lack of crosstalk, joking, hanging out on the internet, that's easy to see, right? If you have all your communication in say one place, Discord, for example, is a tool that's really good at bringing in some of that. There's lots of really good messaging tools for that stuff, but lack of the social stuff is a good one.
Yeah, I'll just add one quickly, a sign, which is burnout. And if you are one of the core active organizers and you notice that you start to say, I have to do that. Why am I, why am I the only one who does this? And, once you notice those stories, you are not yet in the stage of burnout, probably, but potentially those are early signs of, it's not just an individual problem. It's not just you are the martyr, that you have to do it all, but you might be sensing a systematic problem. Yeah.
I'm just going to add one more that comes to mind, which is the lack of meaningful conflict. When people don't care enough to bring their issues to the table, it's a huge problem. And I'll just give one really practical and simple example of this from Make for COVID, not related to meaningful conflicts, but we knew we never intended Make for COVID to be a long-term project. It was a happening and it needed to do its thing and then be over. And I knew that it was time to begin to bring it to a close when our Happy Things meeting every day at 5 p.m. we just had an open Zoom room where people would pop in and say one happy thing that happened during the day, because it was all very stressful and people were really overwhelmed. And it was a total delight to do this. When that meeting began to dwindle, we were like, okay, people have done their work and they're ready to go. And so it was a great indicator for us, just a really simple way of sensing the mood of the group and the needs of the group. But yes, we intended to shut it down. So we knew that there would be a time and we knew it would be quick. So maybe an intentional bottleneck created there a bit, but yeah. Christina, back to you.
Amazing.
Yeah, I guess
Um,
I'll just add one thing about relational, like meaningful conflicts. I think that's something that I personally didn't really get, education or training about. But now there are many, many tools and methodologies of communication to help people surface conflict in skillful ways. And in some ways, oftentimes people only have a piece. They might not have a whole bigger picture. They might be afraid of, oh, if I say this, it's bothering me, but it's going to be incoherent. But the sooner you can invite individuals to surface those things, the sooner you might have a larger picture appearing when people put those pieces together. But those pieces might feel sharp, it might create, potentially harm in the relationship. So now there are many frameworks and approaches people can practice in so that you can actually have meaningful conflict that will actually deepen your relational fabric.
Amazing. What a list. I want to go back in the recording and have the list of signals and possible fixes. So when you see a network that is making the shift and is addressing those hurdles, and you have some amazing sensitive facilitators and community experience officers. I love the fractional CXO, Carol, from your elevating community coordinating to the C-suite. When people have a very healthy network, what does leadership look like? We're used to being in the position to get things off the ground because you can just kind of start with leadership as we know it in the dominant paradigm. What does that look like when there's a healthy peer network and there's still an active core team? How do they not re-centralize or pull the bottleneck back? And how do they lead enough to help the coordination happen that is the core function there?
Yeah, I guess I'll just say one quick thing. I personally don't think the centralization of power is a problem in itself. The hierarchy structure has its own, merits in many, many, circumstances. I think the main problem comes in when the people who are inhabiting those positions in a hierarchy, doesn't matter how high, whether you are at the top or the bottom, if people don't have awareness of the potential traps in that hierarchy, that's where real problem happens. So if I'm a leader at the top of a hierarchy or bottleneck, if I can be aware, it's not just a hypothetical theoretical awareness. It's like I actually observe that every day. I observe how some people now stop talking to me, for example, or observe how some people are afraid of bringing up real tensions. Like, or I hear from this other person, like there's an anecdote of of how my power and habits is getting in the way. And if I actually address it, use skillful ways to communicate and to really identify the problem. And I think a lot of creative solutions will happen that will, in some ways, the end result is, decentralizing the power or make power explicit. But it's not just about the form of, oh, this is central, this is decentral. Like it's not. Oftentimes I see people in the Web3 world, they end up chasing the form of what it looks like. It should look decentral, but the actual, the actual process that gets there is ended up becoming actually very central. And like one quick story is in the web DAO space, decentralized autonomous organization. In a DAO space, there is this startup that I met they want to create a DAO platform that is decentralizing power. Everybody has a vote. But then the startup team, the founder insisted on, on, have a very, hierarchical structure to actually, produce this platform. So a lot of times it's, you can't just make it look good on the surface. It's more about how do the leaders in the position, how are they aware their own relationship to power, and how does that change, and whether they are open to experimentation or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I am still thinking about what a good point that was. I'm gonna have to put that in my brain away for later. So I'll tell y'all what I do when I'm working with groups, specifically designing what I refer to as bottleneck resistant systems. So and I got a lot of these from straight up looking at power grids, weirdly, because power grids, you have internet, internet architecture also is a good one to look at. So what are the things that happen when you have only one connection, maybe one connection between A and B? Not so good, right? And they call it double linking their bonds, right? And I call it, we never ask only one person to make a decision or be a leader or do a thing. Super, super simple. It actually also kind of helps follow up too, right? Human lives are complicated. We're busy. Everybody's a busy person, right? And then there are some skill sets, right? That there's bottlenecking because of a particular skill set. Earlier in the heyday of the internet, that was web skills. Now it's more database skills, right? But you only have one person who actually knows how to do the thing. So what's great about adding two people to do the thing is that the person doing the thing can teach the other person how to do the thing. And then suddenly you have two people who can do the thing. Amazing. So what if we took that and did it pretty much everywhere? So that's why these days I design so that every node in my network has two co-leads. I'm a huge fan of the co-lead model. And I'm also a fan of roles for the nodes, right? So what if instead of a leader, this weird concept that we've somehow elevated super, super high to a position where it's very unlikely that every human's going to have those in the ways that particularly we're socialized to understand them, extroverted, same type of, looking human, that split that into many roles, right? So instead of that, we have maybe a communicator. That person's responsible for communicating with the outside world. We have a project manager. That person's just responsible for making sure that everybody does what they said they do, right? And this is please, y'all, let me just tell you, put project managers in your group. If there's one role that I'd suggest that'll immediately help your groups, get volunteer project managers. You can even train them for 1 hour and watch your completion of objectives soar. It's pretty amazing. Right? And what if somebody was specifically responsible for orienting and pulling in new members, right? What if someone's responsible for organizing events, right? So let's break those functions up and then double link every one of them. Right? So that's the one thing. And you can build double linking in really deep into your structure too, right? And then a lot of folks will be like, but won't that make everything happen slower? So the way to balance that out, right, is to have two people who are responsible for making the snap decisions. So communications with the press is where this happens. Some types of governance decisions, right? Again, not everything has to be a vote, right? Some things that we choose and are and everybody's on the same page about don't have to be, right? So if you have to say choose a thing, choose a tool, design a website, choose a logo, make the group smaller, right? Just make the group smaller and everybody can be yes, those are the folks who are making the decisions. Cool, done. We can be almost as quick to pivot as hierarchical structure while taking everything out that's bad about those structures.
I love the double linking. A single point of failure is never good. But what I really love about it is it still allows for emergence. When you have that one individual upon whose shoulders a decision is placed, they ego quickly jumps in, and it's really hard as an individual to manage that. It can be done, but Carol, as you said earlier, you have biases. And you have defense mechanisms, and we're human, so it's really hard to eliminate all of those. But add another person, and you get another perspective. And if it's a diverse coupling, that has like so much power to increase the capacity of the two, and just create better decisions, more effective decisions overall. So I love that. And I think one of the things that I've tried to do in my projects is push decision making as far out. And so if it's a decision that directly affects you, you should probably be making that decision. I probably shouldn't be making that decision. But that means, and it's something you said too, Carol, about awareness of kind of what's going on with other folks around, awareness of pieces of the structure as well that you maybe can't see into. And when you have that, you know when to call another person to make a decision, because you realize that the decision may affect their portion of the work. And you respect that by asking them to join. So you're giving power, and you're also keeping the decision-making process like as low cost, and with I guess reducing drag basically of the decision-making process. So we did a lot of that in Make for COVID, and it worked really, really well. Things happened really, really quickly. I just want to say one thing, going back to Christina, I think something you said in the original question, I think you said like, what does it feel like when kind of leadership is working, and what does it feel like when when folks are all kind of moving in the same direction with leadership and so on. And I get this sensation, I don't know, maybe Jay and Carol, you have a different analogy, but I get this sensation of like being a part of like a developing wave. And when the wave is headed in the right direction, leadership is really just supporting, facilitating, serving, guiding, and letting the wave kind of do its thing. So I find myself more and more lately really thinking about what it viscerally feels like to be a part of these kinds of things. And for me, that's the sensation. Okay, I'm a surfer. I came from Southern California, so it's a natural analogy for me, but that's what it feels like to me.
All right, so if we have this healthy structure that we can surf on with all of the active people, how do you keep this emergent, dynamic power structure explicit for people who are new? How do you, if your core team has got all of these double linking, if your subgroups are subgrouping and making good nested hierarchies and pushing decisions to the edges, I always think of it as a merry-go-round where you think it's going kind of slow because you're standing in the middle, but a new person is stepping onto the outside and it might be spinning around really fast for them. So how do you deal with that gradient of all the people doing all the things at different levels of engagement and not have it be, because I'm sure that we've all joined networks and had that, here's our 27-page deck about how we function, please read it.
And it was obsolete like the minute you made it, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you need tools for sure. And you need dissemination of that information in a constant flow of information. And it's I think this was like the biggest challenge for Make for COVID. Who do I talk to for? And we had folks who were coming in and they had like amazing skills. You know, we had military, we had folks who flew planes. We literally were booking flights across the state, and we had the Civil Air Patrol, we had police officers, and we had we had these amazing folks with like crazy skills that would come in and they were like, I have a week to do a thing. And then they were gone, and someone else would need to come in to replace them, or not. And we would have to figure out how else do we get this this shipment from, you know, the eastern side of Colorado to the western side of Colorado or whatever. So so we were constantly chasing the right way to like give this structure out to the community and say, here's who you talk to. But because information flowed really quickly, we found ourselves with many, many communicators across the group who were able to do that for us. But I think a whole stack of tools is really required to make this happen well.
Yeah, one concrete kind of tool or method is that I personally found, just use myself as if I'm a new member to a group, I actually don't like to read manuals or whatever is in text, or even if it's a video, I want to experience it for myself. So then I can start to connect the dots of what's on the manual or manifesto or handbook or playbook, you know, however you want to call it. So one kind of concrete tool is to provide a small container, meaning a small cohort, for example, for the new person to join and experience what it feels like. And, you know, one analogy in the village, in the mutual aid village that me and a few other collaborators are prototyping is within the village, you know, can we have a small neighborhood? Like this village is not a geographically co-located, is, you know, people all over the world. But still, you know, can we actually create smaller cohorts that actually has really strong ties with each other? And another concept is called micro solidarity. It's a similar idea where you develop strong experiential connections with a small number of people, and then they can teach you the ropes. They can show, you know, so you don't have to rush to read all the manuals or get overwhelmed. You can just experience one gathering at a time and learn about the larger system. Some people don't want to learn about the larger system. They just want their needs met, which is also fine. But then for some people who are more systems thinking people, they can, you know, get small exposure over time to learn about the larger system.
I love it. And to me, that's naturally how humans learn socially, right? So there's something very ancient, very soothing to the nervous system about that, right? And I'm very in touch with my vagus nerve as a human, just so you all know. So my role models for this type of learning are actually in the insect kingdom, weirdly enough. And Adrienne Marie Brown wrote quite a bit about this. Noticed some of the same things in her emergent strategy book. So call out, she's amazing. Read that book. So I always tell people about how ants make their tunnels, right? So it's like one ant like is like, oh, we need some space here. And so it like makes a little ball of dirt and it like puts its little smell in there because ants see by smelling, right? And it puts a little smell in there and it like moves it to a place. And then other ants come along and they don't have to read a manual. Ants ain't got time for that, right? They're like, oh, somebody, here's the moving the ball smell and it goes over here. So cool. Okay, gotcha, boo. I'm gonna do the same thing. And that's literally how they build tunnels. And I realized when I was reading about this back in the day, I was like, well, humans do that too, right? Have you ever been on a path or a trail and you find a little where somebody cut around the corner of the trail a little bit and made a little shortcut? It's terrible trail craft. My hiker father would be so disappointed in me right now. But okay, don't do it. But right, have you ever seen it happen, right? That's not one person doing that. Right? That's a collective understanding that, hey, it's easier if we just go around this way, right? And then future people see that pathway and take it, right? Obviously, we're in much more complex situations. It's harder to see a trail, but that same concept that Lauren was talking about, where you're making it clear, right? You're making it obvious so that it can be observed how things get done. How you too can get from point A to point C, and then making it clear that folks can do that for themselves is a whole orientation and a whole kind of network-wide DNA, piece of that as well. So just being able to make it so clear that folks don't have to read a manual, right? And if they read it, like I'm down for giving folks like some community agreements that they have to read, but it takes 5 seconds, right? To like scan over them, put your announcements in the announcements thread, like don't be rude, like all of that stuff is great. But I definitely believe that folks shouldn't have to read very much at all. I am though a big fan of orientation, right? Concerted, intentional orientation can look like a lot of things. It can look like a 1-hour meeting where you just have a diagram, maybe of all of your nodes. This node over here and this node over here, right? It's great. People like to see where they are on a map, right? So that's really cool because they can place themselves as a part of a larger whole, right? So, and that's also not about reading a manual, right? That's about a little bit more as well. I'll stop there.
I love the mapping analogy, and the beauty of it too is people can see the white space in a map. Oh, you don't have anyone doing blank. Maybe I can do that, and they can put themselves in that role. And I just want to mention one other thing, which is there's really a piece here too about meeting people where they're at. Some people need an apprenticeship model or a really thorough onboarding. Some people are global thinkers and they really want to see that big picture of the map, and some people are sequential and they want to like kind of piece it together. Some people need to do first before they understand, and some people want to understand the whole thing intellectually before they like take one step into it. And so we had some people who, we did create a playbook for Make for COVID, and we had some people who read that thing like front to back. They were like, well, page 5, section C, line 17 says, and I was like, okay, I don't know. But some people need it. So making sure you have that whole array of materials for people to engage with over time, they all do come in handy. It just does take like love and upkeep and housekeeping to like keep them all in good order. But folks will appreciate having lots of different ways to get oriented again and again.
Yeah, please note my comment about neurodivergent folks and manuals, right? They make a lot of us feel really safe, but only if what's happening in the manual is actually what's happening. Otherwise, you're kind of rickrolling people.
That's a trust diminishing move right away. Big time. Yep.
Be careful what you write down because it just might happen.
I think people idealize in manuals a lot of the time too.
We were so lucky. Oh, sorry, Christina. I was just going to say, we were so lucky to have a couple of social scientists documenting in our space. And so if there were any misalignments, we got called out like instantly. So the feedback loop was, and we haven't gotten into that space, digging into feedback loops and learning loops and things. But yeah, the feedback loop was so fast. We were like, oh, change that. So very, very helpful to have someone to call you on that kind of misalignment.
Amazing. I could sit here asking you brilliant people questions for another hour easily, but I'd love to open it up to anybody who wants to chime in, put something in the chat, just unmute yourself, turn on your video if you're comfortable doing that, and ask any questions or add to the discussion.
Chime in. It's a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much. It's very rich in human relationships, interpersonal dynamics, how to channel that, how to catalyze that. So really, really very refined, like a good wine, I think. I come from a very different background. So my field, originally I was in information management, classic, working with large computer systems. I started specializing in ontologies, conceptual modeling, those kinds of things. And then I discovered communities, online communities, and well, all else followed from that. And my field became community informatics. So I've always been in between like the systems and the interpersonal social world, so the social technical perspective really. And so one thing, it's kind of the themes, recurring theme, fractals was mentioned, system dynamics, kind of the backdrop. And what I often see, it's like these parallel universes. You either have that systems modeling kind of conceptual modeling kind of view and create very elaborate models, or you have that very kind of energetic, personal, interpersonal groups kind of focused approach. And how do we weave them together? What's the intersection between two worlds? How can you, for example, I'm a mapper. I've turned into a cartographer of collaboration ecosystems, and I never could have predicted that. But so I'm learning a lot about cartography as a field. It's not my field originally, but it's absolutely fascinating. Centuries of millennia of mapping and the wisdoms there, and that it's so important what you put on the map, what you don't put on the map, how you put it on the map, what language you use, what layouts, what colors, what selections. So my question really is, if we want to get scaled impacts, like collective impacts, like climate change, climate adaptations, but all the nest of wicked problems kind of intersecting with it. So it's a never-ending mess. How can we unite, not unite, but at least have these worlds intersect in a productive way? So for example, what types of things to map to weave even more powerful, effective, energetic, energizing group conversations, group collaborations that really move the needle in a way? So it's an open question. I don't know the answer, but it's just something I wanted to add.
If you don't mind, Aldo, like I wanted to tack on just a little bit because your provocation was somewhat similar to my own. So what came as you're asking your question is is this a requisite variety kind of a consideration? And if so, that was the nature of my question, is is there a way to tell maybe there's something that's lacking in terms of variety that could be added? So in your case, you're talking about kind of two planes. I wonder if that's a variety kind of consideration.
Yes, I guess so. Variety and also relevant variety, something that triggers, and what triggers is very different depending on the purpose, on the community, on the context. And so there's so many different ways of, some content is dead and doesn't do anything. Other content is very generative. And are there principles, are there patterns that still need to be situated, still need to be interpreted? Thank God. You still need the human agency and intelligence to interpret what's meaningful and what is not. But is there something on the way there, that in between, that we can at least funnel a little bit in that direction? And yeah, and so what is requisite and what is the variety? Good question.
And it may be quite specific.
Yeah, absolutely.
Context. Mm-hmm. I think we have 4 more minutes. I want to turn it back over to Christina here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. This has been incredibly rich.